Welcome, everybody. We're going to be doing the unit CHCDIV002, Promote Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Cultural Safety. So this unit is going to be around the understanding of how we need to work in that diverse area. One of the other units that sit beside this is the wider diversity around the discrimination. The CHCDIV002, however, is specifically around this particular target group that we work with in the community to have an understanding about our community that we work with First Nation and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and to get some of the history and bring that forward. Traditionally in Australia, we are not taught a lot about that, but that is very much a changing space for us as workers, for us getting qualifications, the national qualification where this is an accredited unit. It is essential that we have this underpinning knowledge. This unit is going to help you prepare for that. Your assessments are going to give you some opportunities to do deeper research. So let's go and let's have a look at this. I would like to start with acknowledgement to country, like I do with every one of our courses. And you might find that places that you go as a sector worker or when you become a sector worker, the acknowledgement to country is a very important and respectful part of proceedings that we have when we come together as workers in the sector. In my name, I have got the lands on where I live, work and study, Tarrabalane Bunda, and that's in regional Queensland. I'm going to be asking you to think about what lands you're sitting on if you haven't got that already information. It's going to be one of your assessment questions. So let me do our acknowledgement to country. In this spirit of reconciliation, Hayter Institute of Education acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the very first inhabitants of this nation and the traditional custodians of the land on which we work, live and study. Those lands have never been ceded. We express our gratitude for the sharing of this land, our sorrow for the personal, spiritual and cultural costs of that sharing, and hope that we may move forward together in harmony and in the spirit of healing. We pay our respect to all First Nation people and acknowledge elders past, present and emerging. So this is session 1. We're going to be doing 3 sessions in this. We're going to take a break, how I like you to have your study break. We'll have those intermissions there where you can get up and walk away. This will all be in one recording, so pause and absorb the information as we go. The slides you'll get a copy of, the recording you will definitely have a copy of, your learner's guide, which is a great resource, you will get that. And then any additional resources that I think are really well suited to help you get that depth of understanding as well. And you, of course, will go and do some of your own research. You may already come into this space with some knowledge as well, which will be really valuable for you as a sector worker. So we're going to be speaking about the custodians of the land before colonisation, when white people started to come to this land, how we came to be here, the diversity that we have in our culture, the land on which we sit, the kinship placement on how First Nation Torres Strait Island people consider family or kin, the spirituality that is practiced, the traditional, the dreaming. We're going to talk about that. I do not identify as First Nation or Torres Strait Island person. However, the studies that I do can take me into a space with an understanding of how to best work with someone if I need to access someone who is First Nation or Torres Strait Island as a sector worker, our networks and our collaboration. We've got those in our community. However, many organisations may have an identified person. However, when we come into that space, we need to make sure that we know how to conduct a culturally safe conversation and provide the support, and this will help you bridge those gaps. An Australian Aboriginal proverb is, "We are all visitors to this time, this place. We're just passing through. Our purpose here is to observe, learn, grow, and love, and then we return home." That's a reflection piece, and I think it'll be important to you and make more sense as you start to work through your assessment pieces. For you, your assessments, your written and your skills, which are role plays. For you, this one is around your written work, your research, doing some interviews on this subject, and then putting together a presentation and you speaking to your presentation as well on what your learnings are, and to educate and inform other people about your findings to be helpful in the community. So the Australian Aboriginal culture and history, this unit covers Indigenous, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, getting used to those terms, the abbreviation of ATSI, which is what Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander stands for, or the word Aborigines are considered offensive and disrespectful. So for us to enter into this space, we refer to First Nation, and then we refer to as First Nation and Torres Strait Islander people. Whereas Aborigines would be viewed as a label, that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander and an Indigenous person is the original inhabitant of the land on which we sit. So Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are the first Australians, meaning they are the custodians of Australian land. Before colonisation, before 1788, where Britain decided to send people, their own citizens, their own residents, their own national people, over to this land because their prisons were full. That's how colonisation happened. Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people lived here for greater than 60,000 years, and many can say much longer. There is no written history. It gets passed down story by story, generation by generation, very much like our own families, where we hear a story about an aunt or an uncle or a relative, and that gets handed down by the storytellers. So Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander did not write down English because that was a foreign language. They were foreigners that came to Australia. However, often when you are living on the land, you will learn to speak some of those languages. Many First Nation and Torres Strait Islander people are revisiting their original language as well, which is a very rich history. A lot of the stories were done through Dreamtime stories, meaningful cave paintings and etchings, and displaying that extraordinary past. And that's their communication. So before colonisation, First Nation people did not work with economy of money. Rather, they had hunting, fishing, and sharing of food. Everyone made and repaired their own weapons to be able to hunt. Boomerangs, digging sticks, mainly out of wood that they'd captured from the bush. Some of the ground edge tools made of stone were used as early as 10,000 years before Europeans were using them. So the diversity of First Nation culture is that people miss the complex nature and the total diversity of culture. So when we look at art, art tells a story. I live in a regional Queensland town, and we have some very well-known emerging First Nation artists. So behind their art is a story. So rather than we might look at art and go, oh, I wonder what the meaning is behind that. With all First Nation art, there is a story, and then they share that story with the viewers, the people who look at the art and enjoy the art. You will see a lot of First Nation art on sporting logos. You'll see it start to come into places. Hayter Institute of Education acknowledges a close relationship that we have with First Nation people. Let's have a look at the map where Hayter head office is in Victoria, Australia, Melbourne. So this singles out the lands and the nation. So each of these, if you look at a First Nation map of Australia, this is actually broken down into the different clans, the mobs, or the tribes. The clan is a word that's used, mob not so much. However, there are over 500 different language groups as well. So let's bring that down a little bit smaller. So this is the New South Wales geographical map. And then this is it broken down into the Aboriginal language map as well. So that's going to be part of your research. And I encourage you to look a little further. So the Aboriginal languages of Victoria, we do tend to bring things back to Victoria because that's where Haida is located. So this will give you a snapshot here. I want you to have a look at what is the history of the lands on which you live. I sit on Tarrabalan Bunda, but Europeans call it Bundaberg. So think about yours. Tarrabalan Bunda is only one of the lands. We cover quite a large area in the Bundaberg region. And so there are several lands as well. And then, of course, many more languages that are spoken. So sometimes when someone refers to being on country, you may have a First Nation person living elsewhere. But if you say, where is your country? Often they will tell you that location, which means their family story, their heritage, their connection to land, and all of their family law, LORE, and their kinship. So the diversity is very broad. It's estimated there are around 700 different clan groups or nations around this continent. Different groups or clans develop their own skills, stories, dreaming tracks, languages, traditions, kinship group structures, and cultural expectations. Elders were often the decision makers. Women decided for women, men decided for men. Often if we are working, you may have a family member there as well. It is to ensure cultural safety. It's a sign of respect that we acknowledge that perhaps someone may need that. So because this unit is specifically around this, of course, we put those supports in place for others, but CHCDIV002 is about First Nation and Torres Strait Islander people. Do your own research. Here's an activity. It's an assessment tip. You're going to need to know this when you do your research. So if you like, when you're jumping into the space for your study sessions coming up on your role plays and you're doing this unit, I'd love to see your name and your First Nation land on the screen when you present yourself in real time, or if you're doing a recording. So Aboriginal land councils are a reliable source. And you can research the land that you are on, and you can add this to your Zoom link, but it's also important to know your local history. It's going to form part of your research. So we look at things from our broader lens. I refer to that as your macro, the larger picture, and micro. Micro will be your local story, your community, and likely where you're going to be working or living, and knowing more about what is the history about the lands on which we work, live, and study. So diversity means that Australian Indigenous communities kept and do keep their cultural heritage alive by passing on the knowledge, arts and rituals. There's performances around dance and song, and it gets handed down from generation to another one to protect the cultural materials and sacred sites. So there's laws around that as well to make sure that if you are on First Nation land, that any of the histories there, that we cannot knock that history down. We would not do that in any other country. And we need to acknowledge the only way to do that is to learn to understand and be educated and informed. So First Nation people work with totems at birth. First Nation people are given a birth totem. This will depend on many things. The totem is the very first step of our cycle. So a totem could belong to that clan and that particular family. It brings custodial roles, responsibilities, and customs for that person. A baby boy may have the sand goanna as their totem. This means that as he grows, he will be educated in all aspects of the spiritual significance of the sand goanna and the story behind that. This totem will become a guardian and will be a source of identity and strength and guidance throughout that young child's life. So that's connection. Connection to country is the concept of sacred land. What does that mean? Aboriginal people live in both the physical and the spiritual world. That's where Dreamtime and Dreamtime stories come from, and Dreamtime pathways. Aboriginal people see the land as their mother. Spiritual, physicality, and emotional. That is connection to land. The relationship with the land is one of receiving and giving. We do not own the land, but we are the custodians of the land, is how First Nation people view that. So land rights usually sit around, there's history and there's story there. And more than 60,000 years of that, that's really what land rights mean to First Nation and Torres Strait Islander people. Country means we came from the land, and so we belong to the land. This gives us everything we need: food, shelter, tools, and weapons to be able to hunt and gather food. Country is central to the well-being of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Country is not just soil, it's rocks, minerals, but it's places, times, and spirits that are located on that land. So when First Nation and Torres Strait Island people take you through their lands, or you are invited to be part of something that is happening, it's quite a respectful invitation for you to be able to share that spiritual connection during that time. Often we may learn more about this during NAIDOC week. I'll show you something this year. I was invited by some First Nation women, some were elders, and we were able to walk the Tarrabalan Bunda lands and a trail. We gathered some rocks and some minerals to make some paint. And while I'm no artist, this rock that I collected the rock while I was on that walk, and we all took that back as we did our circle of storytelling about learning about the lands and the trail that we were on and the history behind that. So the jagged lines are the two paths: the path we went when we went along that journey, and then the path that we returned on. And the number of dots here on my rock represent the number of women that were on that. So as a non-Indigenous person, a non-First Nation Torres Strait Island person, to be invited to a special moment like that was amazing. And I get invited annually to those, but that's because a lot of my work in the sector has to do with First Nation and Torres Strait Island people. I have been in that space since the 1970s and used to go and do some work and out on some of the missions as they were first established. From 1968, some of those missions were put together. I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about that. But again, it has to be by invitation, has to be respectful when we're working with this particular cultural group. So what does kinship mean? It's different clans and slightly different to family structures in each clan. So you can extend a family group and it might be called kin or skin groups. That's how people will identify that for us. There'll be a video embedded in here. Please watch that. There's a little bit more information. So kinship is traditionally influenced by marriage decisions. So the family make those decisions about what is a good match. That happens also in a lot of other cultures. So it pretty much governs everyday behaviour. What does kin say about this? Would this be all right with kin? So it's valued It's not meant to suppress, it's meant to enrich. Kinship was about meeting the obligations of one clan, what the expectations are in our family, formed part of Aboriginal law and was closely aligned with the dreaming and the lifestyle, those cultural safety stories. There's a short video there on what kinship is. So just as every culture has its creating stories and sharing them down to everyone, it's the term most used to reflect the creation period whereby creation spirits or ancestors shaped the world and created every natural thing in it. Aboriginal peoples see the world of the dreaming as a fundamental reality. It is an Aboriginal philosophy. It is also the law of the land for them. It is an ongoing link between the spirit ancestors and Aboriginal peoples and all nature. Dreaming stories are linked to different regions, so lots of different animals will be part of that in the dreaming stories. They refer to each group's stories which express their understanding, knowing and beliefs about their origin. So sometimes there's language spoken and stories told that we may not understand. They'll be unique to that area and that clan. And then it's your family's right to be able to share that story because that's your history, that's your heritage, that's your link. And again, it gets handed down from family to family. So the spirituality is, the culture is based on strong spiritual ties that link to ancient lands. The time before colonisation is still very much a part of their people's everyday lives, if they are connected to their heritage as well. The same as every culture, those stories connect them to a time in past of ancestors. So it talks about the spirit which inhabits the land, and they believe the spirit still lives on that land. They do welcome to country to allow others. It's a sign of respect. It is not about permission. It is about bringing people together, like welcome to my home. It means exactly the same thing. And on dying, returning to the soil to be reborn. That is the spiritual belief of First Nation and Torres Strait Island people. The culture is animistic. In an animistic world, everything is interconnected. People, plants, animals, landforms, celestial bodies are all part of a larger reality. In this world, nothing is an inanimate object. Everything is alive. Animals, plants, natural forces, all are energized by a spirit. Previously, in the late 60s, a lot of First Nation people were looked after by the agricultural department because of any matters that dealt with them, simply because of that strong connection to land. There was a myth that was erroneously shared, meaning it was an error, that First Nation people were not even viewed as human, that they were referred to as part of flora and fauna, so the flowers and the land. However, that is not accurate. That is a myth that has been shared. That is not something that happened. What did happen is that because of that connection to land, the agricultural department, the Department of Lands, moved all of those connections, conversations, because they also worked on that land. All the fire backburning, the managing the bush, the plants, the seeds, were all shared with that department. It wasn't until, I guess, as the next decade came through, that people started to recognise that there's so much here, we'll never fully understand it. We needed to be able to make sure that First Nation and Torres Strait Island people were able to work in their own area, the same as what we do for every other government department, every other society that has structure and connection, to be inclusive, to be informed, was to make sure that First Nation and Torres Strait Island people were able to keep their history in one area rather than have it blended or watered down. It really needed to be strong. So in some countries, we have Indigenous people who are also custodians of the land. So you will, for example, in New Zealand, you have your Maori political party. They're a representative of the voice of those needs as an advocate voice. Australia has attempted to do that, but as a country with a very strong link to its European footing and its ties, they're not ready to let go or acknowledge. So when that comes up, First Nation people, Aboriginal people weren't given the vote until the 1960s, and then were recognised as citizens of this law under the Commonwealth law, which of course is the political system and the legal system we work under. But these two things can both be true, can both be the same, and can both work in a collaborative way. And that's what we refer to as closing the gap. It doesn't mean that it's any less of either. It just means, how do we work in harmony? And we do NAIDOC Week, we do National Sorry Day, the same as what we would think of Anzac Day. We would use that moment to connect with our history, the things that have happened in the past, and the people who have been left behind. We do that as a day of honour, and we step into this space. So it's very important for First Nation people, like it is for other people, when anniversaries and milestones come up. It's a time of reflection, and we need to make sure that we are culturally respectful and we create cultural safety. Each person is thought to be a descendant of either a plant or an animal, and this becomes their totem or their spirit guide, and with their own rules of behaviour. I am connected to my spirit animal is, and we can hear that get used in other language where there is crossover, but that's still connection. And First Nation and Torres Strait Island people are absolutely okay with that. So tribal elders were the wise ones and upheld the law and kept the knowledge. In our court systems, if we are dealing with somebody that is First Nation or Torres Strait Island, we will have a liaison officer in that court to make sure that all of those other beliefs, knowing, and heritage, how someone has been raised, is considered in all of that decision making. And also that the community will wrap around supports. Some non-First Nation and Torres Strait Island people, when they go to court, often don't have that support. However, we do have court support officers, but it's about rehabilitating community and connection, and there needs to be an understanding. The same as what we would do if we were working with someone who had English as another language. We may bring in an interpreter. So that is to build connection and understanding, to make sure that what that person has voice to, that we listen to understand, and we provide a better service with a greater understanding of what that person needs. If we're going to be community sector workers, then we need to have an understanding about what makes up our community. In this unit, this is specifically around Australia's history and First Nation. What does dreaming mean? The wheel of Aboriginal culture. This particular chart will help you. It's the people, land, water, and sky. And it will actually give you some of those points there about how to recognise it. The difference in the culture is beginning and end of life, territory or the land, religion, trade, food, quests, where we go for that, plants and dance, music, fibercraft, technology, whether we can take photos because it feels that you're taking the spirit, because the spirit has no end. But if you take a photo, it's a definitive moment of time. It's not that people are fearful of it, it's just that taking a photo of it is not something that First Nation people believe is a true representation of somebody, because it cannot capture the spirit. However, we are closing gaps, and there are moments where we can bring those two worlds together. And if we have intention, if we listen to understand, we definitely we can blend and work beside. So kinship is very important, sacred rituals as well. We see it a lot in sport. And we also see it in education. So we are definitely moving in the right direction. When I go to a little kindy or a preschool and all the kids are sitting in a circle and they're doing their acknowledgement to country, and they're doing some of that in First Nation language on the lands where they work, I know that this then becomes the normal. And that's what we really want to be able to do, is that we, I guess, embrace all of Australia's history. If you are here living in Australia, I was born in Australia. However, I have family members who were not. And so I guess that understanding around that is to make sure that we build a bridge as a worker, and we do that in a professional way, both legally and ethically. It's a law not to discriminate against somebody based on their race, their religion, the colour of their skin, their beliefs, their culture. So we need to do this anyway to meet those professional standards. But it's a really exciting, interesting and respectful space to be in. Learning about the dreaming, this will take you into your learner's guide, but it's a link between spirit and ancestors. So we think cyclic, so it turns to be reborn, rebirth, and then back to the land, and then coming from the land again, that the spirit never goes. There's always that connection. And in dreaming state, that is where people feel the most connected to that spirit world. So the dreaming relates to the lives of Aboriginal people today, as expressed in many forms of music. One of the greatest emerging First Nation entertainers is Mitch Tambo, who has gone back and learned the language of where he comes from. There's some amazing documentaries around young people emerging. Jonathan Thurston, known for sport, but actually he's got an academy, and he's making sure that First Nation people, young kids, are getting opportunities and making sure the access is there as well. I think it's really good for young people to see their First Nation people coming through as leaders, because we can't be what we don't see either. So that role modelling is extremely important. But it's also acknowledging the generations. So in the dreaming and the dream time was just the very beginning. Just as every culture has its creation stories, the dream time is the creation period whereby the creation spirits or ancestors shaped the world and created every natural thing in it. So that is the connection that First Nation have. That's our introduction. Let's take a short break here. And we'll return. Right, welcome back. Let's do our second part of this CHCDIV002, where we're learning about First Nation. We're going to talk a little bit about what happened after colonisation, contact with Europeans, citizenship, stolen generations, Maralinga, where the nuclear testing happened, native title, deaths in custody, rights, language, literacy, community services, the space where you're studying to be able to work as an effective worker in the sector. So history reflects the evidence that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders suffered huge loss, disenfranchisement, discrimination, dispossession due to the colonisation. The effects of colonisation changed their everyday life and the very essence forever. Contact happened when the British occupied Australia. They called the country terra nullius, meaning it belonged to no one and it was empty. However, it's the fires on the shore that recognised where there may be land. So there were inhabitants here. They were the First Nation people. There was no treaty or agreement ever entered into with the Indigenous occupants on the land. It was taken over by white settlers and settlement. First of all came the convicts, and then the settlers came out for the gold rush. For 200 years, mainstream law recognised no Indigenous rights to lands until we had a change of government who wanted to make sure that for us to move forward, we needed to know our history behind us. Citizenship in 1967, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, like others born in Australia with that automatic right, became Australian citizens according to the books. They, except in very rare cases, did not have the right to vote in Queensland, the Northern Territory, or in Western Australia in federal elections. Rights to social security, age pension, even being paid by going to war, differences in pays, you'll hear about lost wages. That was also the case. When someone served in the Australian Defence Force for this country, if they were First Nation, they had to return their uniforms. They did not get paid for that. They were not given medals and they were not recognised at ceremonies until many, many years later, even though they fought beside non-First Nation people and they built friendships that lasted lifetimes. When they came back to Australia, they were not recognised, acknowledged, or given the respect that others were given. So those rights, highly invasive powers, not applicable to other Australians where they were discriminated against, and some of that mindset still happens today. They were citizens in name only in 1967, but in actual practice, no, those rights did not automatically come. In the 70s, there were some places where you went for entertainment where people of dark skin, First Nation, Torres Strait Islander, were not allowed to eat or take refreshment where white skinned people were. Even though Europeans could come from another country, the people who owned the land for more than 60,000 years were not able to access any of those services. They were picked up and put into clusters. Children were swept up as they were outside playing and put into care because that was a political decision that was made as well. So those rights in practice did not happen. Stolen generations happened between 1890 and 1970, where a lot of people were removed by their families by police or welfare officers, which were all government, and they were removed from their families. Most of those children were under 5 years of age. Parents were not told where their children were and were unable to trace them. And that happened for many, many years. They were raised as European children. They were put into institutions and homes and moved to live with non-First Nation people. There were benefits in some ways, and there were definitely deficits in other ways. But to be taken from a family, not because the family were coping or needed that support, they were swept up in trucks, put in the back of trucks and moved over into missions or homes where they had governesses, often run by the churches. So stolen generations, many children were raised on missions or in church or state institutions. Some were fostered or adopted by mainstream Anglo-European parents. There was physical and sexual abuse, and that was common. We've had royal commissions about that. I want you to, in your own time, watch this story here about the stolen generation. It goes a little longer. We don't record the videos when I'm recording or even when we're in live classes. However, you will get a copy of that. And I want you to watch that and gain some insight into some of the history. So it was a presumption by Europeans that for many years that girls would grow up and marry nice white boys, that we would have nice fairer skinned children. If they were girls, they would marry white boys again, and eventually the colour would fade out. That was the original plan. The whole removal policy was based on the women because the women were the ones who could breed, and that is written into history as evidence. Stolen generations as adults, they suffered insecurity, lack of self-esteem, feeling of worthlessness, depression, suicide, violence, abuse of alcohol and drugs, which a lot of people will self-medicate, but the harm, the trauma effect, being ripped from families, not feeling connected to family, these are all mental health concerns. And so it represents and looks like that because there is unhealed wounds in that space, and denial that even somebody's story could be true, and it is true for them, and history tells us that. So have a look at what are the highest rates in suicide that sit around that. Have a look also in our resources around First Nation mental health. What are the significant moments of time in history? In the 1950s and the 1960s, Britain also actively used Australian soil and people to conduct nuclear testing programs. So if you don't know about Maralinga, this link here in your slide will give you a bit more information. If the slide doesn't take you, if the link doesn't take you directly to that site, that'll simply be because it's a third party looking at it. Please just copy it and put it into your search engine. It'll take you there. So people were deliberately exposed to these blasts in order to see the effects of radiation. They were studied, they were used as scientific experiments, and many people, of course, were damaged. The radiation is still tested on that land, and it's still there now. So warning signs at the site were written in English, which local Aboriginal population could not read, so they could not escape the testing either. So Maralinga, the Field of Thunder, is what it's referred to as because of the bomb. The bomb testers did not understand that a labyrinth of crisscrossing pathways of Dreamtime tracks connected that area to their ancestors, stories, and living community. They did not know because they did not find out, and they did not factor that in their decision making. Now we know differently. We definitely do things differently. So Maralinga was about, there were Aboriginal families living there in camps. That's how Aboriginal connected to land, and in the radioactive craters with no idea of what was happening to them. Their dreaming tracks at Maralinga are still contaminated today. There'll be the legacy of the bomb, that nuclear bomb site, and I want you to be able to read a little bit more and listen to some of those videos like I've given you to have a greater understanding of what was happening. You may have been alive in that era, but you may be young enough to not really know much about it other than what you were taught in school. Or this may have been well before your time. However, for us to understand today and our future, we need to make sure that we understand where we came from as well, and where we fit in, and our sense of community and our history as well. Great, welcome back everybody. So this is our final part 3 of this unit. I want to remind everybody who is watching this recording that some of the content is very triggering. It's actually quite shocking, especially if you don't know this history, or if you do identify as First Nation Torres Strait Island person, then I want to let you know that this is something, before you watch these recordings that we send through with this, that it's very sensitive, it's deeply disturbing. However, please be mindful. I like to put in how to reach out. Know that 13 Yarn, if you are First Nation Torres Strait Island person, can help you with that. To work in the sector though, we must have a good understanding around this. And a lot of the stories, we work in that space of being trauma-informed care. Okay, so we apply this for ourselves. We make sure that we're in a good state of mind, which is why I break down this unit for you in 3 small parts so that you can step away and take a moment. And I encourage you to do that as well. So let's wrap up the final part of our learnings for CHCDIV002. So just a brief overview, breaking some of the myths and the untruths of Aboriginal communities today, and I have spoken about some of that. What is an effective partnership? How do we do that and why? It's extremely important in my work that I do every day. However, I'm very mindful that I don't know a lot of things, and I ask. And I ask that respectfully. There's a couple of different ways to work with First Nation people that I wasn't aware of, and I had to learn how to do that. That what I think something means may not necessarily be the case. And I've had to have that explained to me to get a better understanding. So resources to promote effective partnership, we need to have education, knowledge, location. And then how do we deliver programs and services that are culturally safe and encourage increased participation as well? So have a look at the recording around mental health. That's an important one. So how do we bring it all together, close that gap? How do we use this information to improve how we work in the sector? And then how can we use this information to improve what your agency or your employer, your organisation, or the programs you're attached to can improve how we do that work? So in the community service sector, we often work with the most vulnerable people in our community. With Mainstream Australia, we're very good at providing services. However, not one approach fits everybody. So Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are the best people to guide us on how to work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So whilst the ideal situation would be that everyone in community service programs have Indigenous people there, properly trained and qualified, you can learn. This unit will help you. It's definitely the beginning, but there's a lot more to be able to do. So when we're referencing it, working with Aboriginal people and community, that is a practice guide, and I encourage you to look that up. It'll give you some insight on how to approach it, the same as what we are doing with this unit. So properly trained and qualified by Indigenous people. It's not always possible. You may not always have an Indigenous liaison officer. However, we need to know how to get the information to best be able to provide services. It can be as simple as making sure that our posters reflect all of the people, the whole diverse range of community that access our services. Something as simple as that can be a sign of respect. Effective partnerships, we support each other to grow the services. I call those our wraparound supports. And in that space, if I felt that I was unable to work with somebody, I just wasn't connecting enough, I would definitely bring in somebody who could be a human resource in that space so that I could provide a better service and that it was culturally respectful and safe. I do that with every other cultural group that I work with as well. So when we develop meaningful mutual respect and trust, we are making sure that our intention is there, and it increases the participation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families in our services. So there's quite unique cultural heritage. We must make sure that we are including those perspectives, that lens, not our own to have it make sense for us, but for us to go in there with that unconditional regard. And I call that compassionate inquiry, having a curiosity and listening to understand. So our services, when we start our courses, each of our units, every class that we do acknowledgement to country as a sign of respect. That is a practice, part of a service. It should be displayed in writing as well at the entrance of the service of your organisation. It needs to be seen on your websites, in your newsletters. We do that at the beginning of every unit. Every time we step into our learner community, we do acknowledgement to country as well. So they are small steps, but they bring us together. It needs to be written into our policies and procedures because it is law. So there's the legal, we must do. The ethical, it's better if we do. It can have a dilemma. The ethical dilemma usually sits with our struggle or our bias or our leniency towards something. You can be discriminating by favouring somebody over somebody else. You can be discriminating by not providing access that you would with another person, that we judge them based on their language, how they present, their ability to understand, the colour of their skin, the religion, the dress code. Everything that goes into that when we work in the community sector is an unlawful practice. So your policies and procedures are there to keep you safe, because if you're informed, then you can carry out your role. Your employer needs to provide a safe place for you to also work in if you identify as a diverse member on the staff. And they need to give you the resources to make sure that you can do the role that you are there to do. So resources come from education, policies and procedures, and ongoing learning in that place. If we don't understand, we may be able to draw on someone inside our team. We have people who identify as First Nation on our HADA teaching team, our trainers team, and also within our HADA head office as well. And we work closely with some of those leaders in that space, where our CEO does. Even our acknowledgement to country was done in a collaborative, respectful way. So it's extremely important to HADA, because we are specialists in the community sector training. You're going to go out and work in that sector if you choose to with your qualification. So we acknowledge that every time we come into this space. We start our meetings with acknowledgement to country, and some of your assessments where you do a presentation or you're facilitating a meeting, they definitely require you to do that. And we'll be looking for that when we are doing the assessment work. So in your local area, you may have a different acknowledgement to country that has been created specifically for the land on which you work, live and study. So you need resources to promote those partnership, language services and awareness. Health websites are usually the government, but non-government as well. We are very well serviced in Tarrabala and Bunda, where I live. We have a dedicated Indigenous Wellbeing Centre. But we changed the name when we're working collaboratively to Integrated Wellbeing Centre. It is not only for First Nation people, but it primarily acknowledges that it is run by First Nation people. It has the story and rich history about First Nation. When you enter the centre, there's GPs, there's mental health professionals, there's pharmacists, there's a dentist, there's a gym, there's diabetes consultants. It's a one-stop health centre. It's incredible. And we're very, very fortunate to have that. But it's also accessible for every other resident who lives in our community. So it just means that they acknowledge, they welcome us into that space, and everything they do comes back to the history and the rich heritage and the wisdom that's being collected to bring that service there, so that it is culturally safe for First Nation people to be able to go and access those services. And it's done so well. We do a lot of our professional development with that organisation. And I'm very, very grateful that I'm able to go and access that support. They don't only hire and employ First Nation people, but you absolutely would have to be dedicated to that value and the mission statement for any organisation that you go to work with. So have a think about that when you're going in. One, that it's law and we must. It is part of the community service standards, which are our practice standards. It will be in your assessment work for you to research and learn as well. And we assess you on your progressive knowledge throughout this space. So how do we do that? The Commonwealth Department of Health and Ageing and the Office for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Health is a great resource. I've got some links here for you in your slide. These departments might change the name, so just think about your keywords when you do your own research for your assessment. your local Indigenous community members, and I've shared with you what happens in my area, what happens in yours. And that's part of your research. And then what are the resources? I went to school in Australia. I was never taught anything other than the conflict originally, and then the rest of my history books and the resources were all about from the European settlers era. There was nothing at all everything I learned, I had to learn after I left education. That is not the case now. So resources to promote partnership, that is how we can work together. There's several services that provide cultural safety training. There are consultants, find who is available in your local area. You can even bring in First Nation people to do a ceremony for you. The same as we have a Masters of Ceremony, we refer to that, often that's a paid position. We can have a welcome ceremonial, which is often the smoking, the dance, all come with that. And then some people will also book and pay for that to happen. Otherwise, we're respectful if we do acknowledgement to country. But if you ever have a program and there's an elder invited, that would be the respectful way, is to open up any ceremony with the welcome to country if you can. So the aim is to improve the quality of the services that we deliver, to improve the experience for our clients, and to improve our services so that we make sure that we are inclusive to First Nation and Torres Strait Islander people. We deliver our programs that are culturally safe. We choose our wording. And if someone gives us feedback that that is not safe and does not feel culturally respectful, we need to adjust that, take that on board, and then bring that back and make all those reasonable adjustments to make sure that it is in the future. The same way as if we're strapping somebody into a wheelchair because they're a wheelchair user, we check, are you comfortable with that? That's that physical need. Then we need to make sure we meet the cultural needs as well. So we already do this all the time, but we may not know that this is something that we must do when we are creating culturally safe programs and services. Your policies and procedures will be reviewed. You may have First Nation staff, but all staff must abide by them, and it must meet the law. Communication and support will often come from the Aboriginal local community that you have, and that can be some of your research. You may not know First Nation or Torres Strait Island people, but you can get your resources online to be able to do your assessment for this. But you are going to be creating an information session, and you're going to be recording yourself doing that. Or you may come into a study session, and a few of you might actually do that in real time, and we will record it for you if you like as part of your assessment piece. So we'll vary how we do that, but if you can do that on your own, in your own time, then you definitely can go ahead and do that. The instructions on your assessment will be in your material that we provide for you. So we should always review that and do that regularly. So it's important that staff self-reflect in this space. So it may not always be the rules are in a book. It could be you need to be self-reflecting. So community sector workers, I do every day. I keep a reflection journal that helps me improve. I write down every single day what went well and what I could have done differently. And I also make sure that I take a note so that if there's certain times of the week or if there's a pattern, things that are happening for me, because we are workers and we need to make sure that we look after ourselves, I will note that there's certain times that if I don't take those breaks, if I don't get some fresh air, if I don't do some exercise, if I don't eat well, if I don't stay hydrated, I'll put all of those things in my reflection journal and go, you know what, I'm tired because. But if we don't use self-reflection about how we manage ourselves while we are supporting others, we can find that it's very draining work. So your self-care is extremely important. And this can sneak up on you. You might go, I'm going fine, stop. So those rituals, those systems, that structure, those good habits they will definitely look after you in this sector as well. It means that you'll remember to do the things that are important for yourself and for others. So we need to review those. Most organisations twice a year will review their policies and procedures. We must do that. That's our standard of practice, but we do that also because law changes. So we make sure that we display our beliefs, our resources, make that readily available, and to make sure that many organisations have what we call a reconciliation plan. Australia does have reconciliation, and a lot of First Nation people contribute to that. And then we might belong to a group like a peak body. I belong to a few of them. If you don't know about them, then do some research. Because I'm in Queensland, I belong to Q Shelter. That's around housing and homelessness, and First Nation, Aboriginal, Torres Strait Island information is in there. So all our multicultural representation sits in there. Other peak bodies are Queensland Alliance of Mental Health. That's another one which is around mental health. So think about what's available in your community. But a lot of these are online. Go to Community Door. It's amazing. There's a lot of information. But as a learner with HADA, we give you a platform, a simulated workplace dashboard with policies and procedures and templates. So when you're doing your assessments, it'll say, go to First Access. So First Access, you'll get a login, which is HADA Institute. You'll get your password, which is HADA 123456, and you'll go in, it'll open up and it'll be staff login, and that'll be where you'll be able to be a worker, a simulated worker in a simulated workplace environment. So we create the resources that you need. When you do your recordings, your skills assessment, which we call role plays, you will need to do the same to recreate an environment, your background. So on my background, when I'm doing a recording, you can see that I work for HADA Institute. You know who I am, my full name. Please put up your enrolment name. If you like, put your First Nation land somewhere where you live, work and study. But you need to also have a simulated workplace environment. It's very important that you have an understanding that when you jump into the skills, that you introduce yourself as well, and you talk about what it is that you're going to be doing your skills around, and that you duplicate or mirror what that might be like. With your First Nation presentation, your slides might have some First Nation art. Don't go for clip art. Think a little deeper. We'll be assessing and looking for, are you bringing information here and presenting that in a way where someone who doesn't have that knowledge will be more informed, feel more included, and walk away with a better understanding because of your presentation? That is one of your assessments. So how do we work with First Nation people? We adjust how we do our support plans, our individual, our intake, our assessment, our risk assessment. All of that changes to meet the need of our target group. So the same as if we're working with a young person, we pitch to their understanding, or someone who has English as another language, we pitch to that understanding. We go to that world. We have to have that information and understanding to be able to do that, not to expect others to come to us. You can still do your role and make that connection. People will not work with us if they don't feel that they can trust us, or if we're actually not engaged as well. Once you've got that connection, then you'll find that people will want to work with you, even if language is a barrier, even if culture is a barrier. To be respected crosses all language and all time. So Self-determination for any group is your own goals, your own needs, your own plans. So it includes everything from how the policy is and if it fits to the elders rather than the outside making decisions for First Nation people. In the early 1970s, Aboriginal people requested the right to administer their own communities. The federal government agreed, but they put conditions around that. And a central administrator, ATSIC. However, with different government, those things change. This still forms part of the history and the knowing as well. Your presentation and your research will say what are the current ones. So the human rights, we have a Human Rights Commission. Make sure that you go into their site, which will tell you about the rights to self-determination. So it has had many different names. It's now known as the Prime Minister and Cabinet, and a lot of other things come in under that as well. So the Controlled Health Organisation is one, but please do your own research, what will be relevant, and you will be required to reference these in your presentation. There's a couple of other videos for you to watch. Language and literacy, pitch to the understanding. If you don't speak First Nation language and that is what's being used, then you need to make sure that you've got someone who can help broker that. So that's that link. The broker is a person. I've got this person coming in and they want to be able to do some supports for you, fix some locks to secure your property, or whatever service it is that you're going to be in as well. If you work in the sector, your role will dictate what you do, and your target group will be how you do what that is. So policies and procedures mean the policy is your guideline and we work inside those, and the procedure is the protocol around how we do our work. That's the action side of it, and you are required to know how to do both, meet the policy and apply the procedure according to the organisation guidelines, as long as it is lawful to do so. So we need to know both. So language and literacy, it can be a barrier if we don't find ways to communicate that. And people may be trained and qualified as an interpreter. So take the time out to build connection or establish rapport, introduce yourself in a warm and friendly manner. That can, your energy you take into that space can often create a connection, even if there's age or knowledge difference. Your intention, your energy, and especially when we work with First Nation, very much connected to spirit. So the same as if we walk into a room and we feel a vibe, very much First Nation. There's a sense there because they're so connected to that. It's part of their core. So share stories of interest, show your respect, and check if you need to have a translator or a support person in that space as well. So we listen to understand, make sure we don't use words that come from our sector, that we make sure that we pitch to the understanding of the listener. Explain why you need to ask those questions. You might use a word that does not make sense to somebody. The word advocacy is a word that First Nation often don't. It's like your voice. I will help you have your voice heard is what an advocate is. I might use that expression and explanation when I'm working with a younger person or someone who has an acquired brain injury where they may not have capacity. So why would I use being an advocate, even though I am an advocate in the courts? Why would I use that word when I could say court support would be a better understanding? So it's on me rather than the title. Eye contact may not be appropriate for First Nation Torres Strait Island people, so take that person's lead. Often when I'm working in that sector, I am side by side. Hi, how are you? I'm very tactile or kinesthetic. I learn by doing. So for me, looking at the ground is often how I think. I'll think as if you're a very visual person, you learn in pictures, and that can bring people together. If you're a very audio person, you can listen and you can understand. If you're very kinesthetic or tactile, hands-on, then that is those clues are there in the language. Like I feel I understand, or I can get a handle on that. They get a grip. Visual is, oh, I see what you mean. And then the audio is like, oh, I hear what you're saying. Listen for how other people speak and what words they may use. That can give you connection, because you may not always have an interpreter, but our clients give us clues and cues. So listen to understand, to make it a better experience, to make that connection. We may have to work a little harder. So if you need to use pictures, great. I call it Macca's therapy when I'm working with someone if they need food, and it's a good time for me to go and stop and have a break. I'll draw a well-being circle on a serviette. Many, many, many times have I done that on a McDonald's serviette, because it can be a very central, easy place to go and eat. And then sometimes it can be a spot where we can just get a drink of water or have something to eat, as long as we're not using that space where we're discussing anything private. But often it can take 2 or 3 times someone will get a feeling for you if they want to work with you. Just because someone walks in the door does not mean that they're already willing and able to be able to do the work that you might feel is your role to do. Wait till you've got connection. That's important. Then I like to use the acronym WAIT, WAIT, which stands for Why Am I Talking? Get comfortable in those uncomfortable silent moments. Don't feel like you've got to fill the gap. Silence is valued. Silence is reflection. Silence is connection. Don't get caught up in, I've got to have all these clever things to say or give advice. Definitely in First Nation Torres Strait Island, that isn't how communication happens. To acknowledge that deeply felt feelings bring shame or embarrassment, be really mindful that we're working with intergenerational trauma. Every time the story about a family matter, even though it's not happening right here, right now, it re-injures the person that hears the story and the person who shares the story. It is connecting again because they're trauma bonded. If the healing, it doesn't take place. Healing can only happen when there's forgiveness, understanding, and sorry. Time is different in First Nation. Appointment times are different. Other things can take priority. We will be moved aside because family or kin will come first. It does for us who aren't First Nation Torres Strait Island. It definitely does for First Nation Torres Strait Island people. Kinship is very important. We're learning about that as well. So take the time to explain and do not rush people, and try and work with, would morning or afternoon suit you better when you're in that space, or evening, and give options on how to do that. Have flexibility when you're going to be doing your sessions. Know that you're going to be making reasonable adjustments, because if you want to be a worker in this sector, we're always going to be making reasonable adjustments to suit our clients. Would that work for you? So that's how we get consent, informed consent. If your operating hours are between 9 to 5, then you need to make sure that you've got services able to support that person. But if you don't capture them on the phone or in a text message or a face-to-face, then you need to adjust how you're going to do that, and ask your community person, what's the best for you? What's the best way to be able to reach you? Well, if you contact my daughter, she'll let me know. That's their best way. Okay, so that's what we do. We ask first. In summarising, breaking down the myths and the falsehoods about Aboriginal communities that are still there today. Your work as a sector worker is to make sure that you work with the truth and that person's truth. Effective partnerships come from mutual respect. Resources come from those partnerships or our resource providers, other agencies. We deliver programs in a safe manner, and we use language and literacy to bridge that gap, to close those gaps, and other community services who are the subject matter experts in any area. So in this case, this is our final session for CHCDIV002. So I hope you found that interesting. I hope you find that the resources we provide you are helpful because those stories come from First Nation people themselves. Rather than me talk to you about that, I can only tell you what it's like for me as a non-Indigenous person, as a non-First Nation, as non-First Torres Strait Islander person, and the work that I do. And that may be you. Your identity may be the same as mine. However, I also want you to know that I get a lot of my resources from that, from other First Nation people, and we've provided those resources for you as well. So we'll see you next session.